Okay, here's a question for you. How do we get from the land of Nephi to a place called Zarahemla in like 2 or 3 pages of the Book of Mormon? You'll notice that it makes like this huge jump. Almost seems like a totally different group of people. The Nephites triple, double, quadruple in size. We don't even know. So what we're going to look at is the Book of Omni. Now, Omni is kind of a transition period. It gives us a lot of history. As a matter of fact, it gives us hundreds of years of history. And I'm going to try to show you here in my scriptures what that looks like. So let's go to the Book of Omni. And in Omni chapter 1, which is the only chapter in Omni, you know that Enos passed his book down to Jerem. Jerem passed it down to Omni. Omni passed it down to Ammoron. Ammoron passed it down to Chemish. Chemish gives it to Abinadom. And he just keeps going until it gets down to this guy named Amaleki. Now, Amaleki was the son of Abinadom. He says in verse 12, "Behold, I will speak unto you somewhat concerning Mosiah." Now, who's Mosiah? Well, it says here he's the king over Zarahemla. Well, where did Zarahemla come from? Amaleki's jumping way too far forward, so let's explain. He says he was made king over Zarahemla, but before all of that, he was a Nephite. It says he being warned of the Lord that he should flee out of the land of Nephi. And as many as would hearken unto the voice of the Lord should also depart out of the land with him into the wilderness. And so this guy named Mosiah just says, okay, inspired by the Lord, let's get out of the land of Nephi, which is the land that they were inspired to go to in the first place. So they travel further north. Verse 13 tells us how they found where they were supposed to go. And it came to pass that he did according as the Lord had commanded him, and they departed out of the land into the wilderness, as many as would hearken unto the voice of the Lord. This is the part that I love. And they were led by many preachings and prophesyings. Can you imagine what that's like? They're led by preachings and prophesyings, just leaving town, and every once in a while they get some prophecy, some revelation on where to turn and where to go. And they were admonished continually by the word of God, and they were led by the power of his arm through the wilderness until they came down into the land which is called the Land of Zarahemla. So the Lord wasn't just saying, hey, we need you out of the land of Nephi. He's saying, we need you into the land of Zarahemla. There's a people there that I want you to see. Verse 14, and they discovered a people who were called the people of Zarahemla. So let's draw a little map, make sure we understand this. Now, you guys know how this works. They first landed with the Lamanites, giant L for Lamanites, or losers. Anyway, so what happens is they left Lehi and his family, and they traveled up into the mountains. Let's see if we can draw some pretty mountains. Those pretty? Do those look like mountains? Let's just say those are mountains. Okay, so what happens is they're up in the land of Nephi. Now we've got, does that look like an N? We'll just go with it. So they're in the land of Nephi, and then a guy named Mosiah says, let's get out of here. And the Lord gets them wandering around until, boom, they reach a city, a big city, not some small group or village, like a big city. Check this out. It even has palm trees. Does that look like palm trees? Or it looks like some sort of sneed tree, whatever. All right, so they get to the land of Zarahemla. So they show up into the land of Zarahemla. Now they've left the land of Nephi. They've left the land of the Lamanites. And so this becomes like some ambiguous territory, and they're going to have people traveling back and forth to see those people that are still there. Let's go back to the scriptures. I'll show you what happens. So verse 14 says they discovered a people who were called the people of Zarahemla in this city. Now, there were great rejoicings among the people of Zarahemla, and also Zarahemla did rejoice exceedingly because the Lord had sent the people of Mosiah with the plates of brass. This is a big deal. The reason they were excited is now they have a written history which contained the record of the Jews. They knew, this group of people, they knew very little about their history because this is hundreds and hundreds of years after they had left where they came from. Verse 15 tells us more. Behold, it came to pass that Mosiah, this guy that inspired them to all the Nephites to go to the city of Zarahemla, discovered that the people of Zarahemla came out of Jerusalem at the time that Zedekiah, king of Judah, was carried away captive into Babylon. Does this make sense? When we look at the name Zedekiah, that might ring a bell because it takes us all the way back to 1 Nephi chapter 1. I, Nephi, having been born of goodly parents, make this record of my father. Verse 4, it came to pass in the commencement of the first year of the reign of Zedekiah, king of the Jews, that my dad becomes a prophet and says, hey, let's get out of here. And they say, no, there's no Wi-Fi out in the wilderness. And he says, I don't care, we're leaving because this place is getting destroyed. Well, guess what? That same king Zedekiah eventually gets captured and carried away into Babylon. And his son, named Mulek, grabs his people, and they leave when he gets captured. Verse 15, King Zedekiah was carried away into Babylon. That means the Nephites left town and were on their way to the Americas. And shortly thereafter, a few years later, when Zedekiah does get captured, another group leaves Jerusalem. So these are two different groups leaving Jerusalem and coming to the Americas. Verse 16, this group of people journeyed in the wilderness, were brought by the hand of the Lord across the great waters into the land where Mosiah had discovered them. And they had dwelt there from that time forth. 17, and at the time that Mosiah discovered them, they had become exceedingly numerous. So this is hundreds and hundreds of years after the fact. As a matter of fact, you can always check the dates. Nephites left around 600 BC, and they would have left probably shortly after that, 590 BC at the latest. And look, now it's between 300 and 130 BC. Now, we know that this part of the story would have taken place around 130 BC. So what happens is hundreds and hundreds of years later, this is a huge city. This is a large group of people. But notice the difference between Nephites and the people of Zarahemla. They were numerous, verse 17, nevertheless, they had many wars and serious contentions, and had fallen by the sword from time to time, and their language had become corrupted. Interesting note there, you might want to mark that. Their language had become corrupted. They had brought no records with them. Because they had no written language, they didn't preserve their ability to use their old Jewish or Hebrew language with them. And they denied the being of their Creator. Not only did they lose their language, but they lost what sometimes we refer to as the language of the gospel. And Mosiah, nor the people of Mosiah could understand them. So imagine just wandering through the wilderness because the Lord told you to go somewhere, and you walk up and there's this huge, thriving city of atheists that were once Jewish. Verse 18, it came to pass that Mosiah caused that they should be taught in his language. Now, this is a prophet, so I don't think he's just teaching them the language just so they can, do good in school. Think about what language they taught them so that they could understand the Lord. It came to pass that after they were taught in the language of Mosiah, Zarahemla gave a genealogy of his fathers according to his memory, and they were written, but not in these plates, in a separate record. Verse 19, it came to pass that the people of Zarahemla and the people of Mosiah did unite together, and Mosiah was appointed to be their king. They looked up to him, they appreciated him, and he becomes the king. It came to pass in the days of Mosiah, there was a large stone brought unto him with engravings on it, and he did interpret the engravings by the gift and power of God. And they told about this guy named Coriantumr, and Coriantumr's people that were slain, that they had discovered it. He dwelt with them for the space of 9 moons. So they say, you're a prophet. You can teach us all these things. Can you interpret this stone? And so he says, show it to me. And they show it to him. And they're like, we found this guy one time. Going back to our map, we've got the city of Zarahemla up here, right? We've got the land of Nephi, and we've got the Lamanites. Well, they tell them that we found this guy and this record. We wandered off, and when we wandered off, we found this stone and a guy named Coriantumr. We'll put a C over there. And he has a record. We can't read it. We brought it back here, and sure enough, what we find is that there was another separate group of people that came way before any other civilization on this land. This group of people are called the Jaredites. I hope you appreciate this. This is the first time I think I'm writing in lowercase for you. So what happens is he reads it, and gives them the details and says, hey, these are concerning some people that came from the tower. We're talking about the Tower of Babel. You know that because he says he confounded the language of the people, and the severity of the Lord fell upon them. And then Malachi, the one that was writing this book, verse 23 says, I was born in the days of Mosiah, and I lived to see his death, and Benjamin his son reigned in his stead. Well, Benjamin was a good guy. And then that brings us over to the Book of Mosiah, which starts with King Benjamin and his people. Hopefully that makes a little bit more sense, but what I want you to pay attention to is the difference between the Mulekites, or the people of Zarahemla, and the Nephites. Notice what they were missing and what the Nephites had that blessed their lives and turned their whole country around to the point that they have such a righteous king like Benjamin.